If you have ever wondered what it would feel like to wake up inside your own worst mistake, this story is for you. Imagine being fired by the woman you built an empire with, only to remember in that exact moment that you already lived this life once before. He died bankrupt, betrayed, forgotten. Then he opened his eyes and found himself back in the body of a younger man, standing outside the office where his future was about to be destroyed. This time he knew who would betray him. He knew where the money was hidden. He knew which signatures were forged. And he knew exactly how long he had before everything collapsed. But revenge was not the plan. Survival was. And survival would require becoming something far more dangerous than a victim. My name is Adrian Vale. In my first life, I trusted my wife. In my second life, I became the man who replaced her. The elevator doors opened on the 39th floor. Glass walls, black marble, the headquarters of Helix Dynamics. The company I had helped build from a regional logistics firm into a multinational infrastructure giant. In my first life, I walked into this meeting confused. In my second life, I walked in carrying 14 months of future memories. Lena Cross sat behind her desk, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit. To everyone else, she looked like a disciplined CEO. To me, she looked like the woman who would destroy us both. Her fingers were laced together. Same posture, same expression, same lie. "Adrian," she said, "thank you for coming. 27 minutes from now, she would terminate me. In the original timeline, I would argue, plead, accuse, and leave humiliated. 3 years later, I would die in a rented apartment with medical debt and a bottle beside the bed." I sat down without speaking. "The board has concerns," she continued. "They believe it's unhealthy for the CEO's spouse to remain in senior operations. Perception matters. Not the real reason. The real reason was Nolan Pierce. Nolan was our chief operating officer. In public, he was brilliant. In private, he was siphoning company funds through shell contractors. In my first life, I discovered it too late. By the time I had evidence, I was already unemployed, discredited, and locked out of every system. In this life, I already knew the names of the shell companies. Stone Harbor Logistics, Red Lantern Procurement, Mercury Gate Consulting. And I knew the number that would eventually appear in federal court, $38.4 million. "You're letting me go," I said. Lena exhaled as if relieved I had saved her the speech. "Yes, 6 months severance. Standard confidentiality provisions. HR will coordinate with security." Security. Procedure. In the original timeline, anger flooded me here. I slammed the table and demanded explanations. Today, I simply watched her. There was guilt in her eyes. Not enough to stop. Enough to hurt later. "You've already made the decision," I said. "The board supports it." That part was technically true. The board would support almost anything presented as governance reform. I stood. "Then I won't make a scene." Relief flickered across her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. I walked to the door and paused. "One question, Lena." "What?" "When Nolan asks whether I suspected anything, what are you going to tell him?" Her expression froze for half a second. A tiny fracture in the performance. "I don't know what you're implying." "You will." I left before she could recover. Nolan was waiting outside with a coffee cup and a smile that had once seemed confident and now looked predatory. "Rough morning?" he asked. "For one of us," I said. He chuckled, assuming I meant myself. That was the first advantage of reincarnation. People mistake certainty for surrender. In the elevator, I took out my phone and sent a single encrypted message to the only person who mattered. To Malcolm Reed. Subject: "I'm ready to discuss the transfer." Malcolm Reed was 71 years old, worth $9 billion, and known for buying distressed companies the way other men bought watches. In my first life, I met him after I was ruined. He believed me too late to save me. In this life, I intended to reach him before the collapse. The elevator descended. My pulse stayed steady. That was new. In my first life, I spent months asking why. Why Lena chose Nolan. Why the board abandoned me. Why nobody listened when I warned them. After dying and waking up again, the question changed. Not why did this happen, When do I strike? The parking garage smelled of concrete and rain. I sat in my car for a full minute and forced myself through the timeline. Today, fired. In 3 days, Nolan would authorize a $2.1 million payment through Stone Harbor Logistics. In 9 days, the forged approval trail would be created. In 6 weeks, the internal audit flag would be overridden. In 10 months, the board would discover missing cash. In 11 months, Helix stock would crater. In 14 months, federal investigators would raid headquarters. And somewhere between months 12 and 13 in the first life, I drank myself into heart failure. Not this time. I started the engine. The city slid past in gray reflections as I drove to a diner that no longer existed in the original future. It would close next year. I chose it because I remembered nobody there cared who I was. Malcolm arrived 20 minutes late wearing a navy overcoat and carrying no umbrella despite the rain. 2 bodyguards remained outside. He sat across from me and studied my face. "You look healthier than a man who was just fired," he said. "I've had time to prepare. Your message mentioned a transfer. Your 24% stake in Helix." One eyebrow lifted. "That's not a small conversation. Neither is what I'm about to tell you." I slid a folded sheet across the table. Not evidence. Predictions. Dates. Vendor names. Payment amounts. Audit override IDs. Future events. He scanned the page, expression unreadable. "Interesting fiction," he said. "Check line 4, I replied. "Stone Harbor Logistics invoice 8-214A. Hasn't been paid yet. It will be paid in 3 days unless you intervene." He folded the paper carefully. "Suppose I check. Suppose you're right. Why come to me? Because you hate thieves more than you love returns." Faint smile. "You've done your homework. And because Lena won't believe me." Nolan controls the information flow around her. "If I accuse him now, I look like a disgruntled husband." "Are you?" I thought about the first life. Screaming in parking lots, unanswered calls, lawyers I couldn't afford. Not anymore. Malcolm stirred his coffee without drinking it. "You're asking me to hand a controlling position to a fired executive based on predictions and allegations." "No. I'm asking you to quietly position yourself before the market discovers the fraud. The transfer doesn't become public until we have proof. And if you're wrong, then you lose a few weeks of legal fees and I disappear. If you're right, you save Helix. I remove the people who are bleeding it." He held my gaze for a long time. "You talk like a man who has already watched this happen." The sentence hit harder than it should have. "Something like that," I said. Malcolm nodded once. "My counsel will contact you." Quietly. He stood to leave, then stopped. "One more thing, Adrian. If this is a vendetta disguised as governance, I'll crush you myself." "Understood." "Good." He walked out into the rain. I remained in the booth until my coffee went cold. Revenge would have been easy. Leak the affair. Humiliate them. Burn the company down on social media. Thousands of people would lose jobs, pensions, and contracts. In the first life, I nearly did exactly that. In the second life, I remembered the faces of employees at the bankruptcy hearing. People who had nothing to do with the affair and everything to do with paying mortgages. Saving Helix was not mercy toward Lena. It was mercy toward everyone else. Over the next week, I moved like a ghost through my former life. I rented a small apartment under a corporate lease that wouldn't connect back to me. I transferred personal savings into a blind trust. I met with attorney Evelyn Hart, who specialized in shareholder actions and corporate fraud. Unlike the lawyer from my first life, she was in the story early enough to matter. "You're asking for contingency planning on a possible securities case," she said after reviewing my notes. "I'm asking for airtight procedure. No leaks. No prometura quiescence. Because the target has access to internal systems." She tapped the folder. "You're very confident for someone without discovery. Confidence is all I can afford right now." She gave me a long look. "Fine. We build a sealed package. If the evidence appears, we move in hours, not weeks." That was exactly what I needed. On the third day, Stone Harbor invoice 8-214A was paid. Malcolm's office confirmed it privately without comment. On the 4th day, he authorized deeper monitoring. On the 9th day, the forged approval trail appeared exactly as I remembered. That was the moment Malcolm believed me. He called from a secure line. "You have my attention," he said. "Good. How much disappears in total?" "About 38 million if uninterrupted. More if Nolan reaches the international routing stage." Silence. Then, "We proceed." The next months became a lesson in patience. In the original timeline, I spent that period begging Lena to reconsider my firing. In this one, I spent it building a trap. Malcolm's counsel drafted conditional transfer agreements that would move voting control to me the moment predefined fraud triggers were confirmed. Evelyn prepared shareholder resolutions. A forensic accounting team worked under attorney-client privilege. I never touched Helix systems directly. Every fact had to be independently verifiable. Meanwhile, Lena's public relationship with Nolan became less discreet. Industry conferences, charity galas, weekend trips that appeared on gossip blogs. I watched none of it in person. Memory was enough. Once she called. I let it go to voicemail. "Adrian," she said, voice strained. "I know things ended badly, but I'd like us to handle the divorce professionally. Nolan says dash." I deleted the message before she finished the sentence. Not because it hurt, because I remembered where listening would lead. 10 months after my firing, the internal audit flag appeared. In the first life, it was buried. This time, Malcolm's people were already watching. The override attempt was captured. The sealed package became a live case file. 2 days later, Malcolm summoned me to his penthouse office. The room overlooked the harbor, all steel and glass and winter light. "We have enough," he said without preamble. "Not enough for a press conference. Enough for a board seizure." Evelyn slid a stack of documents toward me. Transfer instrument, voting agreement, emergency resolutions. Read every page. I did. Not because I distrusted them. Because in my first life I signed too many things without reading them. When I finished, Malcolm handed me a pen. "Once this executes," he said, "you become chairman the moment the board votes. If they refuse, we go to court and freeze half the company." "They'll vote," I said. "You sound certain." "I've met every one of them in a panic. They choose survival." He laughed softly. "There's that strange certainty again." I signed. For a moment, the room went quiet. Not triumph. Not relief. Recognition. In my first life, this was the point where I lost everything. In my second life, it was the point where the future finally began to diverge. Then Malcolm leaned back and asked the question that would determine everything. "When do we move?" I looked out at the harbor and remembered the board meeting where I had been escorted out like a criminal. "Tomorrow morning," I said. 9 o'clock. Don't warn anyone." And for the first time since waking in this second life, I felt something that wasn't anger, fear, or calculation. I felt ready. The next morning arrived cold and gray. In my first life, I spent that morning sitting alone in a cheap apartment, staring at rejection emails and wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. In this life, I wore a tailored dark suit and stepped out of a black sedan at exactly 8:47 a.m. Helix Dynamics Tower stood before me like a monument to choices. Some good, some catastrophic. The security guards at the front entrance noticed me immediately. One of them stiffened. "Mr. Vale." I smiled. "Morning, Eric." His confusion was obvious. 3 months ago, he had escorted me from the building after my termination. Now I was walking back in. "I wasn't informed you were coming," he said carefully. "You weren't supposed to be." I handed him a sealed document. His eyes widened as he read the heading. Emergency Board Authorization. Signed. Validated. Already filed. His expression changed instantly. "Understood, sir." The elevator ride to the executive floor felt strangely familiar, like watching a movie for the second time. You already know where every scene leads. The only question is whether you can change the ending. The board meeting had already begun when I arrived. Through the glass walls, I could see every director seated around the long conference table. Lena sat at the head. Nolan sat to her right. Both looked comfortable, confident, completely unaware their world was about to collapse. I pushed the door open. The room fell silent. Lena's face lost all color. Nolan looked annoyed. "Adrian," Lena said. Several board members exchanged nervous glances. One of them whispered, "What's he doing here?" I closed the door behind me. "No need to stop the meeting." Nolan leaned back. "This is an executive session." "Not anymore." Lena stood. "Security dash. They won't come." The confidence in my voice made everyone freeze. Even I could feel it. This wasn't the same broken man they remembered. This wasn't the husband begging for explanations. This was someone who had already watched this scene once before. Nolan smirked. "You really can't let go, can you?" I walked toward the far end of the table, toward a chair that had remained empty. The chairman's chair. Nobody spoke as I sat down. Then I placed a thick folder on the polished wood. The sound echoed through the room. Lena stared at it. "What is this?" "Your future." The room became very quiet. One director cleared his throat. "Perhaps someone should explain what's happening." "Gladly," I said. I opened the folder. 10 months ago, shortly before my termination, company funds began moving through a network of vendors. Nolan rolled his eyes. "This is ridiculous." "Stone Harbor Logistics." His smile weakened. "Red Lantern Procurement." The smile disappeared completely. "North Ridge Consulting." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because they could see something changing. Not in me. In him. People don't realize how obvious guilt becomes when someone unexpectedly knows the truth. Lena looked from Nolan to me. "What are you talking about?" I slid several pages across the table. "Forensic accounting reports." One director grabbed them immediately. Another leaned over. Then another. The silence became heavier with every page they read. Finally someone whispered, "My God!" Lena picked up the report. Her hands trembled. At first she looked confused, then concerned, then horrified, because the numbers kept growing. 1 million, 3 million, 7 million, 12 million. The final figure sat highlighted in red. $38,417,000. Missing. Nolan suddenly stood. "This is fabricated." "No," I said calmly. "It isn't. Those companies are legitimate vendors. 3 are shell corporations. They are not. 1 is registered to your brother." The room froze. I already knew this moment. In my first life, investigators discovered that detail months later. This time I delivered it early. Nolan's face drained of color. I continued. "Another is registered to an apartment occupied by your cousin." Silence. "The 3rd exists only on paper." A board member looked up sharply. "Is this true?" Nobody answered, because only one person could, and he wasn't speaking. Lena looked at Nolan. "Nolan?" "Nothing." "Nolan?" Still nothing. Then, for the first time since I entered the room, fear appeared in his eyes. The board noticed it too. People often think evidence wins arguments. It doesn't. The reaction to evidence wins arguments. And Nolan was reacting exactly like a guilty man. I slid another folder onto the table. "This one is more personal." Lena frowned. "What is that?" "Context." Her expression hardened. "Adrian Dash. Open it." She hesitated, then opened the folder. The first photograph was enough. Her hand froze. The second made her gasp. The third made several directors look away. Hotel records, private photographs, vacation bookings, messages, months of proof. Her affair. Not because I cared anymore, but because motive mattered. The board needed to understand why oversight disappeared. Why Nolan received unlimited trust. Why nobody questioned unusual expenses. One elderly director removed his glasses. "Oh God." Lena looked like she wanted the floor to open beneath her. "Adrian," she whispered. I felt nothing, and that surprised me. In my first life, I imagined this moment hundreds of times. I imagined anger, vindication, satisfaction. Instead, I felt empty. The woman I loved no longer existed. Maybe she never had. Nolan suddenly slammed both hands onto the table. You planned this? Yes. You followed us?
No.
You hired investigators? Yes. His face twisted. You obsessive dash. Careful. My voice cut through the room like a knife. Every word you say from this point forward can become evidence. That finally shut him up. One board member turned toward me. What exactly are you proposing? I reached for the final document. The most important one. The document Malcolm Reed had spent months preparing. I placed it in the center of the table. Yesterday morning, I said, the largest shareholder of Helix Dynamics executed a conditional transfer agreement. The directors stared. One of them grabbed the paper. Then his eyes widened. He read it twice, then a third time. Finally, he looked up. Is this real? Yes. Lena's voice shook. What transfer? I met her eyes. The transfer of voting control. She blinked, then blinked again, like her brain refused to process the words. From whom? A new voice answered. From me. Everyone turned. The conference room doors opened. Malcolm Reed entered. 2 attorneys followed behind him. The atmosphere changed instantly. Even the directors sat straighter. Malcolm wasn't merely wealthy. He was feared, and feared people rarely needed to raise their voices. He took a seat beside me. Good morning. Nobody responded. After reviewing extensive evidence of financial misconduct, Malcolm continued, I exercised my rights as principal shareholder. One director swallowed. You transferred control? I did. To whom? Malcolm glanced toward me. To Adrian Vale. The room exploded. Questions came from every direction. What?
Impossible.
When? How? Lena looked physically sick. Nolan looked like a man watching a building collapse around him. Malcolm raised one hand. Silence returned instantly. The transfer is legal. One attorney placed additional paperwork on the table. Verified. The second attorney added more. Filed. Malcolm folded his hands. And effective immediately. Nobody spoke, because nobody knew what to say. A fired executive had just become the most powerful person in the company. The irony was almost beautiful. Lena stared at me. Why? The question sounded genuine. Not angry. Not defensive. Just broken. Why would you do this? I looked at her quietly. You fired the only person trying to protect this company. Tears appeared in her eyes. Adrian.
No.
I shook my head. Not now. For the first time, she understood. The man she once controlled was gone. The husband she betrayed was gone. The version of me that would forgive anything was gone too. Only then did the final phase begin. Malcolm looked toward the directors. Shall we vote? Nobody objected. Not one. The evidence was overwhelming. The company needed leadership. The shareholders needed protection. And survival always beats loyalty. One by one the votes were cast. Approval. 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 Unanimous. The chairman struck the table once. Motion carried. My appointment became official. Just like that. 10 months of planning. 2 lifetimes of pain. 1 vote. Done. Nolan exploded first. This is a setup. Nobody listened. You can't prove anything. The attorneys exchanged amused looks. Malcolm smiled slightly. We already have. Nolan lunged toward the documents. Security entered immediately. Not ordinary guards. Corporate security specialists already waiting outside. They moved fast. Very fast. Nolan struggled. Shouted. Threatened lawsuits. Threatened revenge. Threatened everyone. It only made him look guiltier. As they dragged him toward the door, he screamed at Lena. Say something. She didn't, because she had finally realized the truth. Not only had Nolan stolen from the company, he had used her, manipulated her, turned her into a shield. Every excuse she made, every warning she ignored, Every person she pushed away, including me, all of it suddenly made sense. And the realization was destroying her. The doors closed behind Nolan. Silence returned. Then Lena stood, slowly, like someone carrying invisible weight. Should I leave too? Nobody answered immediately. I looked at her. For a moment I remembered our first apartment, our first vacation, the nights we stayed awake planning Helix together. A life that could have existed, a future that never happened. Then I pushed the memories away. Your resignation will be discussed after the investigation. She nodded.
No argument.
No fight.
No pride.
Just exhaustion. She walked toward the door. Halfway there she stopped. Without turning around she asked, "Did you ever stop loving me?" The room became completely silent. Every director looked away, because some questions were too personal even for a boardroom. I thought about it carefully, then answered honestly, "Yes." A tiny sound escaped her throat, almost like a sob. Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. And for the first time in both lives, I sat in the chairman's chair, not as a husband, not as a victim, not as a man seeking revenge, but as the man responsible for saving the company. Unfortunately, that was the easy part, because 48 hours later, federal agents would arrive. And what they uncovered would reveal a conspiracy far bigger than anyone imagined. If the story made you feel something, leave a like. Not every story is meant to comfort you. Some are meant to follow you. And if this one stays with you, subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper.